Jamal Drummond sat on the 47th floor of a building with his name on it, drinking coffee from a porcelain cup that cost more than most people's grocery bill. He was watching 3 dots move on his phone screen. 3 suns, 3 dots, 3 different directions across Atlanta on a Monday morning in March. The oldest was standing in the lobby of a hotel he could no longer afford, holding a suitcase worth $3,000 and an envelope containing $50. The middle one had already spent $35 of his $50 on a networking event that would give him nothing but a name tag and a table of strangers who would forget him by lunch. The youngest was sitting in a public library with a pencil and a sheet of paper dividing 50 by 7. By Friday, 2 of them would call their father begging. The third would not call at all. Jamal Drummond had built Drummond Capital Partners from a single rental property in southwest Atlanta into a portfolio worth $1.2 billion. He was 62 years old. He wore the same size suit he had worn at 30. He still got to the office before anyone else, and he still read every contract himself, every page, because his grandfather had once told him that a man who lets someone else read for him will eventually let someone else think for him. The house in Buckhead sat on 2 acres behind a wrought iron gate that opened without sound. 6 bedrooms, a kitchen with marble countertops imported from Italy, a dining table made from black walnut, 12 chairs hand-carved built to hold a family that would fill them. Most nights, 4 chairs were used. Most nights, one of those 4 was empty until the food was cold. Jamal had 3 sons. Elliot was 28. He held the title of vice president at Drummond Capital Partners, a title his father had given him 3 years ago, and that Elliot had not yet earned in any way that mattered. He came to dinner on time but spent half of it on his phone, his thumb moving across the screen while his fork moved across the plate, both on autopilot. He did not look up when he spoke. He answered in half sentences. He had the posture of a man who believed his presence alone was contribution enough. Darnell was 25. He was starting a company. He had been starting a company for 2 years. The company had a name, a logo, a website, and an Instagram page with 4,000 followers. It did not have revenue. It did not have a product. What it had was Jamal's money arriving in monthly transfers that Darnell called investment, and that Jamal had recently started calling something else in his head, though he had not said it out loud yet. Darnell arrived 40 minutes late to dinner that evening. He did not apologize. He said traffic the way people say traffic when they mean I did not prioritize this. Isaiah was 22. He had graduated from Morehouse 4 months ago and taken a job at a small nonprofit in East Atlanta that paid $31,000 a year. Jamal had offered him a position at Drummond Capital 3 times. Isaiah had declined 3 times quietly, without explanation, the way he did most things. He ate his dinner without his phone on the table. When he finished, he picked up his plate, carried it to the kitchen, washed it by hand, dried it, and put it back in the cabinet. Leapfrogging night, since he was 14 years old, no one had asked him to. Jamal watched all of this from the head of the table. He had been watching for months. He watched the way Elliot talked without listening, the way Darnell arrived without arriving, the way Isaiah cleaned up after himself in a house full of people paid to clean. He was watching the pattern. His grandfather, Cornelius Drummond, had come to Atlanta in 1951 with $11 and a Bible with notes in the margins. He had built a small construction business. He had bought property when property in black neighborhoods cost nothing because the city had decided those neighborhoods were worth nothing. He had been wrong about many things in his life, but he had been right about land. His son Jamal's father had inherited the business and lost it within 8 years. Bad deals. Bad partners. A gambling habit that started small and ended with the house. Jamal had rebuilt everything from nothing. He knew what nothing felt like. He knew the weight of an empty refrigerator. He knew the sound of a phone that rings and rings because the person calling wants money you do not have. He had carried that knowledge every day for 40 years, and it had made him careful and precise and relentless. His sons had carried none of it. There is a pattern in wealth that economists have studied and that families have lived. The first generation builds, the second generation maintains or tries to. The third generation inherits a thing they did not build and do not understand, and they spend it the way people spend things they believe are infinite, which is to say, carelessly and completely. Jamal had read about this pattern. He had lived through it once already from the other side. As the son who had to rebuild what his father destroyed, he looked at his three sons, and he could see the math clearly. He could see where this was going. After dinner that evening, he went to his study. He sat at the desk, the old one, the one he had kept from his grandfather's office. He opened the top drawer. Inside, next to a leather-bound notebook with a cracked spine, was a pocket watch. Gold-plated, scratched the glass face, clouded from decades of handling. It had not worked in 15 years. He kept it anyway. It was the only object he owned that had belonged to Cornelius Drummond. Everything else had been sold or lost or taken. The watch remained. He picked it up. He held it the way you hold things that are heavier than their weight. He opened the notebook beside it. The pages were brittle, the handwriting slanted and deliberate, written by a man who had learned to write late in life and treated every letter like it cost something. Jamal turned to a page near the back. He had read this page before. Many times. But tonight, it read differently, the way sentences read differently when the conditions around them change. The line said, "A man who cannot feed himself with his own hands has no right to feed others with someone else's." He closed the notebook. He set the watch on top of it. He sat in the chair for a long time. The following Sunday, Jamal called his three sons into the study. Not the conference room at Drummond Capital, not the living room, the study, the room with the old desk and the watch in the drawer. This was not a business decision. This was a father's decision, and the room mattered. He placed 3 envelopes on the desk. White, thin, sealed. Elliot looked at them and smiled the way you smile when you assume everything is a formality. Darnell picked his up immediately, turned it over, weighed it in his hand the way he weighed everything, looking for the angle. Isaiah did not pick his up. He looked at his father's face first. Jamal said, "Each envelope has $50 in cash. That is what you will live on for 7 days, starting Monday morning. No credit cards, no calling friends for money, no coming back to this house. Your phones stay on for emergencies only. You walk out with what you have." Elliot laughed. It was a short laugh, the kind that comes before understanding. Darnell said, "Is this a joke?" Isaiah said nothing. He picked up the envelope. He held it for a moment. He felt how light it was. Jamal did not explain why. He did not give a speech about character or discipline or gratitude. He said, "Monday morning 6 a.m. The house will be locked. Your cards are already frozen. The cars stay in the garage. Whatever you need, it comes from that envelope." The room was quiet. He had already spoken with the bank. He had already told the office that Elliot would be on personal leave for a week. He had already changed the security code on the gate. This was not impulse. This was a man who had spent 3 months watching and 3 weeks planning and 1 evening deciding. Everything was in place. The silence after he finished speaking lasted 11 seconds. Jamal counted. He had learned a long time ago that the most important things people say come after the silence, not before it. Elliot said, "Come on, Dad." Darnell said, "You cannot be serious." Isaiah put the envelope in his back pocket and said, 6 a.m. Jamal nodded. Isaiah left the room first. Monday morning came the way. Monday mornings come, whether you are ready for them or not. Elliot walked out the front door at 6:15 with a Louis Vuitton suitcase and the envelope in his jacket pocket. He called an Uber. The ride cost $12. He arrived at the Kimpton Hotel in Midtown, walked to the front desk, and handed over his card. The woman behind the counter swiped it, looked at her screen and said she was sorry, but the card had been declined. Elliot asked her to try again. She did. Same result. He stood at the counter, his suitcase beside him, $50 in his pocket, minus the $12 he had just spent on the ride, and for the first time in 28 years, he was standing somewhere that his last name could not open. He stepped outside and called Troy, a friend from college. Troy said, "Sure, come over, you can crash on the couch for a night or two." Elliot took another Uber. $6. He arrived at Troy's apartment in Decatur and put his suitcase in the corner of the living room. By noon, he was hungry. He walked to a restaurant 2 blocks away, the kind of place he would normally walk past, and ordered a grilled chicken sandwich and a water. $18 with tip. He had $32 left for 6 days. He had not yet done the math. He would later lying on Troy's couch at 2 in the morning, staring at a ceiling that was not his. Darnell left the house at exactly 6 a.m. with no suitcase. He had a backpack, a phone, and a plan. The plan was to turn $50 into more than $50 because that was what entrepreneurs did. That was the word he used for himself. Entrepreneur. He had seen a networking event, listed online a startup mixer at a co-working space in West Midtown. Tickets were $35. He bought one. He told himself this was an investment. He told himself connections were more valuable than cash. He told himself a lot of things that morning. He arrived at the event in his cleanest sneakers and his best jacket, and spent 3 hours shaking hands and exchanging business cards and explaining a company that did not yet have a product to people who smiled politely and moved on. By 2 in the afternoon, the event was over. He had $15 left. He had 7 business cards from people who would not remember his name by Wednesday. He had no place to sleep. Isaiah walked out the front door at 5:45, 15 minutes before he had to. He carried a backpack with 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, and a small notebook with a black cover. He did not call anyone. He did not take an Uber. He walked. He walked to the YMCA on Lucky Street and asked about a room. $62 a night. He nodded, said thank you, and walked out. He walked to the Atlanta Fulton Public Library on Carnegie Way and sat down at a table near the window. He took out the notebook and the pencil he kept tucked in the spine. He opened to the first page and wrote at the top $50, 7 days. Below that, he wrote $7.14 per day. Below that, he made 3 columns. Food, water, shelter. He studied the columns for a while. Then he crossed out shelter and wrote beside it, find free. He walked to a Dollar General 4 blocks away and bought a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and a refillable water bottle. $8.50. He filled the bottle at a public fountain on his way out. He ate 2 slices of bread with peanut butter standing on the sidewalk watching the city move around him. He had $41.50 left. He wrote the number in the notebook. He closed it. He put it back in his backpack. He kept walking. 3 sons. 3 envelopes. The same $50. One of them had spent $38 before noon. One had spent $35 on a room full of strangers. One had spent $8.50 and had enough food for 3 days. The week had barely started. Elliot lay on Troy's couch that first night and did not sleep. Not because the couch was uncomfortable, though it was a brown corduroy thing with a dip in the middle that smelled faintly of laundry detergent and old popcorn. He did not sleep because for the first time in his life he was lying in a space that was not his wearing clothes he had not had dry cleaned, with no certainty about where he would be in 48 hours. Troy had said, "You can stay tonight, but my cousin is coming in from Macon on Wednesday. I need the couch back." He had said it casually, the way people say things that are not casual at all, the way people say things when they are being generous but also setting a boundary they should not have to set. Elliot stared at the ceiling. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Streetlight came through the window in a thin stripe across the carpet. A car passed outside, its headlights moving across the wall and then gone. He thought about his apartment in Buckhead, the king-sized bed, the blackout curtains, the silence that money buys. He thought about the $32 in his wallet. He thought about 6 more days. The next morning, he walked to a Starbucks 3 blocks from Troy's apartment. He ordered a grande latte, $8. He did it without thinking the way you do things. Your body has been trained to do the way habits work when they are not habits, but architecture built into the way you move through a day. He was standing at the pickup counter waiting for his name when he realized what he had done. He looked at the cup. He looked at his wallet. $24 left. 5 days. He drank the coffee anyway. By Tuesday afternoon, Troy was being polite, the way people are polite when they want you to notice that they are being polite. He did not ask Elliot to leave. He did not say anything directly. But the apartment had shifted. Troy wiped the counter after Elliot used it. Troy glanced at the couch cushions. Troy mentioned his cousin again twice unprompted. Elliot had not bought groceries. He had not cooked. He had not offered to pay for anything, or clean anything, or contribute in any way that was visible. He had not thought to because he had never had to. The mechanics of reciprocity, the small daily transactions that hold friendships together when money is not the foundation, were mechanics he had never learned. On Wednesday morning, he began to call people. Friends. People he had gone to college with. People he had dined with at restaurants where the bill was never a thought. He called Marcus. Voicemail. He called Andre. Hey man, I'd love to help, but this week is crazy. He called Simone. She picked up. She listened. She said, So your dad cut you off, like for real? The question sat in his chest the rest of the day the way questions sit when they are not really questions but mirrors. So, your dad cut you off. As if the connection between Elliot Drummond and every person in his phone was a cord that ran not to him, but through him back to the building with his father's name on it. As if the moment that cord was cut, the phone stopped ringing back. He sat on a bench in Piedmont Park that afternoon, with his suitcase beside him and $24 in his pocket, and nowhere to go by nightfall. Troy's cousin had arrived that morning. The couch was no longer available. The suitcase, hand-stitched leather brass hardware worth more than most people's rent, sat on the ground beside his feet, like an artifact from a life that was already becoming difficult to believe had been real. He could not sell it. He did not know how. He could not eat it. He could not sleep inside it. He looked down at his shoes. Oxford Italian leather, $600. His feet hurt. He had walked 9 blocks that morning, which was more continuous walking than he had done in years, possibly ever. His body was informing him of something his mind had not yet accepted. Darnell had spent $35 on the networking event and left with 7 business cards and no plan for dinner. The cards sat in his back pocket. He took them out on the sidewalk outside the co-working space and looked at them. A wellness brand founder, a crypto consultant, a woman who described herself as a community architect, whatever that meant. None of them had asked Darnell what his company actually did. None of them had needed to, because the answer would have been the same answer it had been for 2 years, which was nothing yet but soon. He had $15. He had no place to sleep. He had not eaten since a granola bar that morning bought from a gas station for $1.50. He walked for a while. The city moved around him the way cities move around people who are not part of their machinery. Cars passed. People walked dogs. A woman jogged by without seeing him. He had never noticed before how many people could look in your direction without looking at you. He stopped at a convenience store and bought a case of water. 6 bottles, $3. He carried them to the corner of Marietta Street and Centennial Olympic Park Drive, and set up on the sidewalk the bottles lined up on the concrete beside his feet. He sold them for $2 each. This was the plan. This was the hustle. Buy low, sell high. The first principle of every business book he had ever read, applied in its most literal and least glamorous form. 3 hours. Afternoon sun on the back of his neck, the kind of heat that sits on you like a hand. Sweat down his spine pooling at the waistband. People walked past. Most did not look. Some looked and kept moving. A man in a suit glanced at the bottles, then at Darnell, then at his phone, and crossed the street. 2 tourists bought 1 bottle each. A teenager bought 1 and did not say thank you. 3 bottles sold. $6, minus the 3 he had spent. $4 profit for 3 hours of standing in the sun. He was packing up the remaining bottles when a woman stopped. She was maybe 70 small, wearing a floral blouse and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She had the posture of a person who had been standing for a long time and had decided that standing was simply what her body did. She looked at the bottles. She looked at Darnell. She bought one, $2. She opened it and drank standing right there on the sidewalk watching him. Then she said, "You selling water, or you running from something?" Darnell did not answer. He did not know the answer, which was part of why he did not give one. She looked at him the way old women look at young men when they can see the whole situation clearly and are deciding whether to say what they see. Her name was Mrs. Opal Jenkins. She owned a laundromat 4 blocks east, a place called Opal's Clean and Press that had been open since 1989. Darnell did not know any of this yet. She said, "Come back tomorrow if you need work. I pay $10 an hour cash. The shop is on Highland, just past the barber shop with the red awning. You will see it." She walked away. She did not wait for him to accept or decline. She made the offer the way people make offers when they have been making them for decades and understand that the offer is the whole of their responsibility. What happened next was his. Darnell stood on the sidewalk with $19 in his pocket and the name of a laundromat he had never heard of. He did not go the next morning. His body woke up in the doorway of a closed bank branch where he had slept with his backpack under his head, and his first thought was not Mrs. Opal's offer. His first thought was that he was Darnell Drummond, and Darnell Drummond did not fold laundry for $10 an hour. He would remember that thought later. He would remember it with the specific clarity that comes from recognizing the exact moment you chose wrong. Isaiah found the church on Tuesday evening. It was a small brick building on the west side, set back from the street behind a chain-link fence with a gate that did not lock. A hand-painted sign by the door said, "Hot meals, 6 p.m., everyone welcome." Below it, in smaller letters, someone had written with a marker, "No questions asked." He had been walking for most of the afternoon, mapping the neighborhood in his head. He had passed 3 shelters, 2 were full. One had a line that wrapped around the block. He had eaten bread and peanut butter for lunch, sitting on the steps of a closed post office, watching the street. He had $33 left. He was keeping track. The notebook in his backpack had a running total on the first page, updated every time he spent anything. $8.50. That was all he had spent in 2 days. He intended to keep it that way. The line at the church was short. Maybe 15 people. They stood quietly the way people stand when waiting is not an inconvenience, but a practice, something the body has learned to do without protest. Isaiah took his place at the end. He did not feel out of place. He did not feel in place either. He felt like a person standing in a line, which is all anyone in the line was. Inside the room was a fellowship hall. Folding tables covered in white plastic tablecloths, metal chairs, fluorescent lights. The food came from a kitchen in the back, served by 2 women in aprons and a teenage boy who looked like he would rather be anywhere else but was there anyway. Isaiah sat at a table near the wall. Across from him, a man was already eating. He was maybe 65, thin, clean-shaven. He wore a denim jacket with a flannel shirt underneath, both worn but bien namastrased, the creases still visible in the flannel, as if someone, perhaps himself, had taken the time to fold it carefully. He ate slowly. He cut his food into small pieces with a plastic knife and fork, handling them with the specific care of a man who had once eaten at tables with real silverware and had not forgotten how. His name was Booker Tate. Isaiah did not ask him about his situation. He asked him about the jacket. It was a small question, the kind of question that opens doors without pushing them. "Mister," Booker looked down at it and said, "My wife bought it. 1997. Still holds up." That was how it started. A jacket. A dead wife. A conversation that moved in the way conversations move between strangers who have no reason to perform. Mr. Booker had been a carpenter. 31 years. He built tables, bookshelves, bed frames, cabinets. He worked for a small company in Decatur, and then on his own, and then for whoever needed something built. He was good at it. His hands told that story even now, thick-fingered, calloused at the pads, the knuckles slightly swollen the way they get from decades of gripping tools. His wife Lorraine got sick in 2019. Cancer. The insurance covered some of it. Not enough. The deductibles alone were more than he made in 3 months. He sold the tools first. Then the truck. Then the house. He paid what he could. The bills kept coming. Lorraine died in 2021 in a hospital room that cost $800 a night, and the debt survived her. He said all of this without self-pity, the way you describe weather. It rained, the road flooded, the house went. Then one morning you wake up and you are the person you used to walk past. That sentence sat in Isaiah, the way certain sentences do not on the surface, but somewhere deeper, somewhere that would take days to fully hear. Nearly 2 out of 3 personal bankruptcies in America are connected to medical expenses. Not addiction, not laziness, not poor decisions, medical bills. People who did everything they were supposed to do, who worked and saved and insured themselves, and still went under because the system was not built to hold them. Mr. Booker Tate was not an exception. He was a statistic in a denim jacket eating carefully in a church basement, carrying the posture of a man who had once built things with his hands and now had nothing left to build. He reached into the breast pocket of the jacket and pulled out a carpenter's pencil. Short, flat, worn down to maybe 3 inches. He tucked it behind his ear, the way he must have done 10,000 times in 31 years of work. He said, "Old habit, measure twice, cut once." Isaiah took out his notebook. He wrote it down. Measure twice, cut once. He did not know yet what it meant to him. He would. That night, sleeping on a cot in the church basement, Isaiah made a decision. He had come into this week thinking the challenge was survival. Get through 7 days on $50. Do not call his father. Do not break. He understood now that survival was the minimum. It was the floor, not the ceiling. The question was not whether he could survive the week. The question was whether the week could teach him something he did not already know. He closed the notebook and put it under the cot and lay in the dark, listening to the sounds of 15 other people breathing in a room that smelled like floor cleaner and canned green beans. And he decided that he was going to learn something. Elliot did not make this decision. Elliot, on that same Wednesday night, was sitting on a bench in Piedmont Park with a suitcase and $24 and no idea where to sleep. Troy's cousin had arrived that morning. The couch was taken. The conversation had been brief and polite and final. "Good luck, man. I hope your dad comes around." The door closed. Elliot stood on the sidewalk outside Troy's apartment building with his luggage at his feet and the full weight of a city that had nowhere in it for him. He walked to the park because it was the only place he could think of that did not require money to enter. He sat on a bench near the lake and set the suitcase beside him. It was a beautiful object. Monogrammed leather brass clasps, satin lining, a graduation gift from his father 3 years ago when Elliot had been given the VP title and the suitcase, and the assumption that both would carry him through the world without difficulty. $3,000 of luggage, $24 of cash. The arithmetic was absurd and precise, and it was the first time in Elliot's life that he understood the difference between owning something and being able to use it. He called his father. The phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He called a 3rd time. Voicemail. He left a message. His voice was different now, stripped of the ease it usually carried the way voices change when they have no audience to perform for. "Dad, this is not funny anymore. I need." He stopped. The sentence hung there unfinished. He did not know what came next. He did not know what he needed because he had never had to identify it before. Need had always been met before it became a sentence. He hung up. He looked down at his shoes. $600 Oxfords on park dirt. His feet hurt. They had been hurting since Tuesday. He had walked more in 3 days than he had walked in the previous year. His body was sending him information he had no experience processing, the dull ache in the arches, the blister forming on his right heel, the heaviness in his legs that came from having never been asked to carry him further than a parking lot. Somewhere across the city, Isaiah was volunteering in a church kitchen, washing pots that were not his, cutting vegetables he would not eat, setting up chairs for people he did not know. He had been doing this since that morning. He had walked into the kitchen at 7 a.m. and told the woman in the apron, "I can help if you need it." She had looked at him, looked at his clean hands, and pointed to a sink full of dishes. He washed them. He scrubbed the pots. He peeled carrots. He carried cases of canned corn from a storage room in the back. He swept the floor. He set up the folding chairs, all 40 of them, one at a time, spacing them evenly the way you space things, when the act of spacing them is itself a form of care. These were tasks that in his father's house had been done by people who were paid to do them. He had never thought about those people. He thought about them now. When the dinner service started, Mr. Booker came in and saw Isaiah behind the serving line ladling soup. He stopped. He stood in the doorway and looked at the young man in the clean shirt holding a ladle, and something moved across his face that was not quite surprise and not quite recognition, but was in the neighborhood of both. He sat down at the same table as the night before. When Isaiah finished serving and came to sit across from him with his own plate, Mr. Booker said, "Most people who come here take. You are the first one this week who gave something first." Isaiah said, "I do not have much to give." Mr. Booker looked at his hands. "You got 2 hands and time. That is more than most people think they have." They ate together. Mr. Booker talked about carpentry the way people talk about things they love without needing to explain why they love them. He talked about the grain of different woods, the way oak resists you and walnut invites you, the way pine forgives mistakes. He said, "Every piece of furniture I made, I put a mark on the bottom, my initials, BT. So even if no one sees it, I know it is mine. That is what work is. It is not the money. It is the mark you leave." Isaiah wrote it in the notebook that night. The mark you leave. 3 words on a page in a small black book that was becoming something more than a ledger. In the house in Buckhead, Jamal sat in his study and looked at his phone. The GPS showed 3 dots. One was stationary in Midtown near Piedmont Park. It had not moved in 2 hours. One was somewhere in West Midtown, moving erratically, the pattern of someone walking without a destination. The third was in the same place it had been every evening for 3 nights, running a small church on the west side. Jamal did not know what his youngest son was doing there. He knew only that Isaiah kept going back. He set the phone down. He picked up the pocket watch from the desk. He held it the way he always held it, with both hands feeling the weight of something that had stopped working years ago but was still somehow the most precise thing he owned. Darnell woke up on Friday morning with $0 and a body that had begun to communicate in a language he had never had to learn. His stomach had been empty since yesterday afternoon. Hunger, he discovered, was not a mood. It was mechanical. The stomach contracting against nothing. A lightness in the head that made the sidewalk tilt slightly when he stood up too fast. A heaviness in the legs that contradicted the lightness everywhere else. As if gravity had redistributed itself and settled below his knees. He had slept on a bench near a bus stop on Highland Avenue. Not slept exactly. Lay down. Closed his eyes. Listened to the city do what the city does at 3 in the morning, which is not nothing. There is always a car. There is always a siren somewhere far enough away to be someone else's emergency. There is always the specific silence between those sounds that is louder than the sounds themselves. He stood up and walked east. He was not deciding to go to the laundromat. He was walking. His feet were making choices. His mind had not yet approved the way feet do when the body has run out of alternatives and starts overriding the parts of you that are still negotiating with your pride. He reached the laundromat at 8:12 in the morning. He stood outside for 5 minutes. He looked down at his sneakers. $400. Limited edition. He had waited in line for 3 hours to buy them. He looked through the glass door at the inside of Opal's Clean and Press. Washing machines from the 90s, beige and dented. Tile floor cracked in 3 places. A ceiling fan turning slowly above the folding tables, moving the warm air around without cooling it. A handwritten sign on the wall that said, "Unattended clothes after 1 hour will be folded and placed on the shelf. Please be considerate." He opened the door. Mrs. Opal was behind the counter, sorting quarters into paper rolls with the efficiency of someone who had sorted 1,000,000 quarters and would sort 1,000,000 more. She looked up. She looked at him. She did not say, "What happened?" She did not say, "I knew you would come back." She did not say anything that would have required him to explain himself or defend the fact that he was standing in her laundromat at 8 in the morning with nothing in his pockets and nothing left of the person he had been performing for 25 years. She pointed to a pile of clothes on the folding table. Clean, warm, fresh from the dryer. she said. Start there. Darnell started there. He folded for 4 hours. T-shirts, jeans, towels, bedsheets, children's clothes, work uniforms. He pulled loads from the dryers and carried them to the table and folded them and stacked them and put them on the shelves with the ticket numbers Mrs. Opal gave him. His hands were warm from the fabric, the specific heat of clothes just out of a dryer, a heat that fades fast if you do not fold quickly enough. He learned this in the first hour. By the second hour, his hands knew it before his mind did. The smell stayed on his fingers. Detergent and fabric softener, and something underneath that was just clean cotton. The smell of cleanliness before it becomes invisible, before you put the clothes on and forget that someone washed them and dried them and folded them. So you did not have to. He swept the floor. He wiped down the machines. He emptied the lint traps, pulling out thick gray sheets of compressed fiber that came away in one piece if you were careful. At noon, Mrs. Opal handed him 4 $10 bills. She did not count them in front of him. She had already counted them. She handed them over the way you hand someone something they have earned, without ceremony, without commentary, the transaction complete in the act itself. $40. Darnell held the bills. He had received money before, transfers from his father's account, checks for birthdays, an allowance that continued long past the age when allowances should stop. He had never held money that smelled like fabric softener. He had never held money that his hands had produced. Mrs. Opal was wiping down the counter. She said without looking up, I opened this place in 1989, had $200 and a used Maytag that leaked from the bottom. I put a bucket under it for the first 6 months. Darnell listened. She said, I never had investors. I never had a pitch deck. I had dirty clothes and people who needed them clean. That was the whole business plan. 35 years later, that is still the whole business plan. She looked at him, then the way she had looked at him on the sidewalk 3 days ago, seeing the whole situation and choosing what to say about it. She said, You young men talk about disruption, about scaling, about exit strategies. I do not have an exit strategy. I have a 6 a.m. opening time and customers who need their work clothes clean by Monday. That is enough. That has always been enough. Darnell walked out of the laundromat at 12:30 with $40 in his pocket. He stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the sign above the door. Opal's Clean and Press. Below it in smaller letters, since 1989. The paint on the letters was faded. The sign itself was slightly crooked, tilted maybe 2 degrees to the left, the way things tilt when they have been holding steady for a long time without anyone adjusting them. 35 years. No rebrand. No pivot. No venture capital. Just clean clothes for people who needed clean clothes. He stood there looking at that sign for a long time. Elliot had slept on a park bench the night before. He had not planned to. He had planned to find a shelter. He did not find one because he did not know where shelters were. The same way he did not know where bus routes ran, or what time libraries opened, or how much a loaf of bread cost. These were categories of knowledge that had never been relevant to his life, and their absence had never been visible until now. The way the absence of a thing is never visible until you need it. He had bought a packet of instant noodles from a gas station, $1.20. He had eaten them dry sitting on the bench, breaking off pieces and chewing them slowly, the way you eat when you are trying to make something last. He drank water from a public fountain. He had $18 left. On Friday morning he called his father. He had not called since the voicemail 3 days ago. He had told himself he would not call again. He called anyway, the way people do things they have told themselves they would not do, because the body and its needs eventually overrule the mind and its pride. Jamal answered. The silence on the line lasted 4 seconds. Elliot could hear his father breathing. He could hear the faint hum of the house in Buckhead, the specific ambient sound of a home with central air and thick walls and carpeted floors, a sound he had never noticed until he was standing on a sidewalk listening to it through a phone. Speaker. Elliot, said Dad, I cannot do this. I was not built for this. The silence that followed was different from the first. It was the silence of a man choosing his words with the precision of someone who knows that what he says next will live inside his son for a very long time. Jamal said, "That is what I was afraid of." Then the line went dead. Elliot stood on the sidewalk holding his phone. The screen went dark. He did not call back. He walked to the public library on Carnegie Way and sat in a chair near the window and looked out at the street and did not move for 2 hours. He was not reading. He was not sleeping. He was sitting in a chair in a public building with $18 and no plan and no network and no performance left to give. For the first time in 28 years, Elliot Drummond was exactly the person he was, which was a person who did not know what to do next. Isaiah woke that same Friday morning with $26.50. He knew the number without checking. He had written it in the notebook the night before, the same way he wrote it every night. The running total updated the day's expenses, listed in small, neat handwriting below the balance. He had spent $23.50 in 5 days. He had eaten. He had slept. He was fine. He walked to the church at 7 a.m. to help set up for breakfast. The woman in the apron, whose name was Mrs. Dawson, had stopped being surprised by him. She handed him a hairnet and pointed to the oatmeal station. He served for an hour. He ate a bowl himself, standing in the kitchen the way he ate most meals, now standing quickly without sitting down the way working people eat when there is more work to do. Mr. Booker was not at breakfast. Isaiah found him at 9:30, sitting on the low wall outside the church, leaning forward with his forearms on his knees, and his face tight with the specific expression of a man managing pain, his back. He could not straighten up. He had been sitting in this position since before dawn, waiting for the stiffness to release, but it had not released. It had settled in and made itself permanent for the day. Isaiah sat beside him. He did not ask if Mr. Booker was all right because the answer was visible. He said, "What do you need?" Mr. Booker said, "Something for the pain. I have not been able to afford it in a while." Isaiah walked to a pharmacy on Martin Luther King Jr. Drive. He bought a bottle of ibuprofen, the store brand 200 tablets. $11. He brought it back. "Mr. Booker took 3 pills with water from the fountain and sat with his eyes closed for 15 minutes waiting. Then Isaiah did something that was not in the plan. There was no plan for this. There was only the notebook and a sentence, "Mr. Booker had said 2 nights ago that had been sitting in Isaiah's mind the way certain sentences sit, not leaving, not arriving, just present. He walked to a hardware store on Joseph E. Lowry Boulevard. He bought a small piece of poplar wood, a sheet of sandpaper, and a tube of wood glue, $9. He carried them back to the church in a plastic bag and set them on the wall beside Mr. Booker. He said, "You said you are a carpenter. Show me." Mr. Booker looked at the wood. He looked at Isaiah. He looked at the wood again. His hands, which had been resting on his knees with a slight tremor, the kind of tremor that comes from inactivity and age, and the slow erosion of purpose, moved toward the poplar. They touched it. The tremor stopped. He picked up the piece of wood and held it the way you hold things your hands remember. He turned it. He felt the grain with his thumb. He reached behind his ear and pulled out the carpenter's pencil, the one he still carried, the one that had been worn down to 3 inches by 31 years of marking and measuring and making. He began to measure. He began to mark. He did not have a saw, so he scored the wood along the pencil lines with the edge of the sandpaper backing, folding and snapping with a precision that came from somewhere deeper than memory. Muscle. Bone. The body remembering what the mind had tried to let go of. Isaiah sat beside him and watched. He did not help. This was not his to help with. This was Mr. Booker's. Over the next 2 hours, sitting on a low wall outside a church on the west side of Atlanta, a 65-year-old man who had not built anything in 2 years made a box. A pencil box. Small. Simple. 4 sides, a bottom, a lid that slid into grooves he had carved with the edge of a key. The sandpaper smoothed the surfaces until they were soft under the fingertips. The glue held the corners square. It was not a complicated piece. It was not art. It was a box that did what a box is supposed to do, which is hold things. But the edges were clean. The corners were true. The lid fit. Mr. Booker turned the box over. He took the pencil from behind his ear. On the bottom of the box he carved 2 letters. B. T. He pressed hard enough for the lines to be permanent. He set the pencil down. He looked at the box for a long time. Then he looked at Isaiah. He said, "First piece in 2 years." Isaiah did not say anything. There was nothing to say that the box had not already said. He had not given Mr. Booker money. He had not given him charity. He had given him $9 worth of wood and sandpaper and glue, and Mr. Booker had given himself back the thing that mattered more than shelter or food or money. He had remembered who he was. That night, Isaiah wrote in the notebook. He wrote the balance first, $6.50. Below it, he wrote 2 words, enough. Below that, he wrote a sentence he would come back to many times in the months ahead. He wrote, he did not need the wood. He needed to be asked. Sunday came the way. Sundays come slowly, and without urgency, the city moving at half speed, the streets emptier, the light, different, softer the way light gets, when even the sky seems to understand that the week is over. Elliot was in the library on Carnegie Way. He had been there since Saturday morning. He sat in the same chair near the window. His suit was wrinkled. His shoes were scuffed. The Louis Vuitton suitcase sat beside him on the floor, a thin layer of dust on the brass clasps. He had $18. He had eaten a granola bar from a vending machine for dinner the night before. $2. $16 left. He had survived the week, the way a man survives a flood, by climbing onto a roof and waiting. Not by swimming, not by building, by holding on. He sat in the chair and looked out the window at people walking past who did not see him, and he understood in the quiet way that understanding comes when there is nothing left to distract you from it, that he had spent 28 years being carried and had mistaken it for walking. Across the city, Darnell was in the laundromat, his second day. He arrived at 7:30 before Mrs. Opal asked him to, because something had shifted in the way he thought about the work. He was not performing it. He was doing it. The difference was invisible from the outside, but total from the inside. He folded shirts faster than he had the day before. His hands knew the motions, now the way hands learn things when they are given something real to do. Collar down, sleeves in. Fold at the middle. Stack. Next. Mrs. Opal handed him $40 at the end of the shift. He had $55, more than he had started with. But the number was not what sat with him. What sat with him was a sentence, Mrs. Opal had said that morning while she was refilling the soap dispenser. She had said it casually, the way people say things that are not casual at all. She said, "You are not useless. You just never had to be useful." He stood outside the laundromat again. He looked at the sign again. He did not look at it the same way. Isaiah was sitting on the steps of the church with Mr. Booker. He had gone to a gas station that morning and bought 2 cups of coffee, $2 each. He brought one to Mr. Booker, who was sitting in the same spot on the low wall, the pencil box on the stone beside him, the carpenter's pencil behind his ear. They sat together and drank the coffee and said nothing. The morning was cool for Atlanta, in March, the kind of cool that sits on the surface of the air without going deep, the city deciding whether it was ready for spring. A dog walked past without an owner. A woman pushed a stroller on the other side of the street. A bus stopped at the corner and opened its doors, and no one got on and no one got off, and it closed its doors and pulled away. Isaiah had $2.50 left. He wrote it in the notebook. He closed the notebook. He put it in his backpack. He finished his coffee. He sat on the steps of a church on the west side of Atlanta with a man who had built a pencil box the day before, after not building anything for 2 years, and neither of them said a word, because some mornings the silence is the whole conversation. 3 sons. The same week, the same city. One was sitting in a library, with dust on his suitcase and nothing left to perform. One was standing outside a laundromat, with calluses forming on his palms and a sentence he would carry for the rest of his life. One was sitting on church steps with $2.50 and a notebook full of things that money could not buy. The week was over. What it had built was just beginning. Jamal unlocked the front door at 6 a.m. on Monday morning. He had been awake since 4. He had made coffee and sat in the kitchen and waited the way you wait for something you set in motion that you can no longer control. Elliot arrived first, 9:15. He came through the front door carrying the Louis Vuitton suitcase, which was scuffed now along the bottom edge where it had been set on concrete and park benches and library floors for a week. His suit was wrinkled in places that pressing would not fully correct. His shoes had lost their shine. He did not look at his father. He did not speak. He walked past the kitchen, past the dining table with its 12 chairs, up the stairs and into his bedroom. He closed the door. The lock turned. Jamal stood at the bottom of the staircase and listened. After a moment, the sound of water, the shower running. Elliot was bathing for the first time in 3 days. Jamal stood there and listened to the water and understood what the water meant without needing his son to explain it. Water, when you have not had it for a while, is not hygiene. It is restoration. It is the body being told it is allowed to exist comfortably again. He went back to the kitchen and waited. Darnell arrived at 11. He came in through the side door, the one that opened directly into the kitchen. He was wearing the same clothes he had left in, but they were cleaner than Elliot's, which was a detail Jamal noticed without commenting on. Darnell set 2 things on the kitchen counter. The first was a small stack of bills, 5s and 10s, folded once. $55. The second was a torn piece of paper with a phone number written on it and a name, Opal Jenkins. He looked at his father. He said, "I am going back to work there on Tuesday, if that is okay." Jamal looked at the money. He looked at the torn piece of paper. He looked at his son's hands, which were different from the hands that had left this house 7 days ago. Not visibly different, not calloused or marked, but held differently. Open at the sides instead of shoved in pockets. The hands of a person who had recently used them for something and had not yet forgotten the feeling. He looked at the sentence his son had just said. "I am going back to work there on Tuesday, if that is okay." In 25 years, Darnell had never asked permission for anything. He had announced. He had demanded. He had assumed. He had not asked. The question mark at the end of that sentence was new. It was the newest thing in the room. Jamal nodded. He said, "That is okay." Darnell went upstairs. Isaiah arrived last. 2:14 in the afternoon. He walked in through the front door with his backpack over one shoulder, the same backpack he had left with no heavier, no lighter. He set it on the floor by the kitchen table. He reached into the front pocket and took out 2 things, $2.50 in coins, which he placed on the table in a small stack, and the notebook. He opened the notebook to the first page and set it beside the coins. He did not explain it. He did not narrate it. He placed it there, the way you place things on a table, when the table is the sentence and the objects are the words. Jamal sat down. He pulled the notebook toward him. He read. The first page, $50. 7 days, $7.14 per day. Below that, the columns: food, water, shelter. The word shelter crossed out. Find free written beside it. He turned the page. Day 1. Bread, peanut butter, water bottle. $8.50. Balance $41.50. He turned another page. Day 2. No expenses. Dinner at church. Balance $41.50. He turned another. Day 3. Same. And then, on the bottom of that page, in handwriting, that was slightly different from the accounting above, slightly looser, the way handwriting changes when you stop recording and start thinking, measure twice, cut once. He turned the pages. The entries continued. Ibuprofen, $11. Wood sandpaper glue, $9. Coffee times 2, $4. And between the numbers, the other entries, the ones that were not expenses. You got 2 hands and time. The mark you leave. He did not need the wood. He needed to be asked. And on the last page, one word underlined once. Enough. Jamal closed the notebook. He sat with it for a moment, the way you sit with things that are heavier than their size. Then he did something he had not planned. He opened the top drawer of the desk in the corner of the kitchen, the old desk, the one from his grandfather's office. He took out the pocket watch. Gold-plated, scratched the glass face, clouded. He carried it to the table and set it down beside the notebook. The two objects sat next to each other, a watch that had stopped working 15 years ago and a notebook that a 22-year-old had filled in 7 days. One belonged to a man who had built something from nothing in 1951. The other belonged to a man who had just discovered what nothing felt like in the present tense. They sat on the same table in the same kitchen, and they said the same thing in different handwriting. Jamal did not pick a winner. He did not announce who had passed and who had failed. He looked at the watch and the notebook and the $2.50 and the $55 and the torn piece of paper with Opal Jenkins's number on it. He looked at the ceiling where the sound of Elliot's shower had long since stopped. He said, "I have something to show all three of you, tomorrow." The next morning, Jamal drove. He did not tell them where they were going. The three sons sat in the back of the car, which was a thing that had not happened since they were children, all three in one vehicle, shoulder to shoulder, the specific geometry of siblings who have been through something separately and are now together in a confined space, trying to determine what, if anything, has changed between them. The city moved past the windows. Buckhead gave way to Midtown. Midtown gave way to the West Side. The buildings got smaller. The sidewalks got emptier. The trees stayed the same because trees do not observe economic boundaries. They turned onto a street in Vine City. Jamal slowed the car. He pulled over beside a lot. It was large, maybe half an acre, bordered by a chain-link fence on 3 sides and a crumbling brick wall on the 4th. Weeds pushed through the concrete. A rusted dumpster sat in one corner. On the fence facing the street, a sign. White background, blue letters. It read, "Future Site of the Drummond Community Workshop and Housing Initiative." The three sons looked at the sign. None of them had seen it before. Jamal got out of the car. They followed. He stood at the fence and looked at the lot the way he always looked at property, reading the ground the way other people read documents. He said, "I bought this 3 years ago. I did not tell anyone. Not the board. Not the lawyers. Not any of you." He told them what it was. A workshop on the ground floor. Woodworking, electrical, plumbing. Skills training for people coming out of shelters. Transitional housing. The street. Above the workshop, 42 units of affordable housing. Below market rate. Permanently below market rate. The building would not generate profit. The building was not designed to generate profit. The building was designed to give people who had lost everything a place to learn something with their hands and a place to sleep while they learned it. He said, "I did not send you out there to punish you. I sent you out there to see if any of you could see what I have been seeing." He told them about the will. Not the Drummond Capital will, a different will, a personal one. The person who led this project would inherit it in his name, not the company, not the portfolio. This lot, this building that did not yet exist. This thing that would never be measured in returns or margins or quarterly reports. This was the thing he cared about most. This was the legacy he wanted to leave. He stopped talking. He let the silence carry it. Elliot was the first to speak. He looked at the lot, at the weeds, at the crumbling wall, at the neighborhood stretching out in every direction, small houses and empty storefronts and a liquor store on the corner. He said, "Dad, this neighborhood. There is no ROI here." The sentence landed on the concrete between them. Jamal did not respond. He did not need to. Elliot heard it as it left his mouth. The way you sometimes hear your own sentences, a half second after you say them and realize what they contain. He went quiet. He looked at the ground. He did not speak again. Darnell was looking at the lot differently. He was not looking at the lot. He was looking at the street behind it, at the houses, at the laundry, hanging on a line behind one of them. He said quietly, almost to himself, "You would need a laundromat in the building. People always need clean clothes." It was a small sentence. It was a sentence about clean clothes. But it was the first time Darnell Drummond had looked at a piece of real estate and thought about what the people living near it actually needed instead of what could be extracted from them. Mrs. Opal Jenkins had not taught him this in words. She had taught him this in warm towels and a 6 a.m. opening time and 35 years of unchanged signage. Isaiah did not speak. He walked away from his father and brothers and stepped through a gap in the chain-link fence. He walked the lot, slowly, the way you walk a place when you are not inspecting it but listening to it. He stopped in the far corner near the brick wall. He knelt down. He put his hand flat on the ground palm against the broken concrete and the weeds pushing through it. He stayed there for a moment. Then he opened the notebook. He wrote something. Jamal watched from the fence. Jamal looked at his 3 sons. One was staring at the ground, silenced by his own words. One was looking at the street with new eyes, seeing laundry lines and thinking about need. One was kneeling in the dirt with his hand on the earth and a pencil in the other hand writing. He saw them clearly in that moment. He saw them the way a man sees his own life played back at 3 different speeds. Elliot was Jamal at 30, when money was the answer to every question, and the only question worth asking was how much. Darnell was Jamal at 40 when the first cracks appeared and the first real questions began. Isaiah was Jamal at the beginning, before the building, and the name and the 47th floor, when his hands were on the ground, when his eyes were looking up. Jamal did not announce a winner. He did not rank them. He stood at the fence and asked one question, the same question to each of them in the same voice. If I gave you this, what would you build? Elliot answered first. He had recovered his composure the way people recover composure when they have spent a lifetime practicing it. He straightened his jacket. He looked at the lot with the eyes of a man who had spent 5 years reading spreadsheets and attending board meetings and speaking in a language built entirely of efficiency. He said, I would hire a project manager. Bring in a general contractor. We could have this operational in 6 months, maybe less, if we fast-track the permits. It was a competent answer. It was the kind of answer that worked in conference rooms and quarterly reviews. It had no pulse. Darnell spoke next. He was still looking at the houses across the street, at the laundry on the line. He said, I would talk to the people who live around here first, find out what they actually need before building anything. It was a better answer. It was an answer that had Mrs. Opal Jenkins somewhere inside it, somewhere in the space between dirty clothes and people who needed them clean. But it was still an outline. It was still a man describing what he might do, not what he had already begun doing. Isaiah did not answer with words. He walked back through the gap in the fence. He stood beside his father and opened the notebook. He turned to the page he had been writing on while kneeling in the dirt. On the page was a rough sketch, a floor plan. The ground floor showed a workshop space divided into sections. One was labeled woodworking. The notation beside it was specific. It said, Mr. Booker Tate, head carpenter. Contact the shelter on Forsyth Street. He is there most nights. Above the workshop, the sketch showed housing units. Small, simple, numbered. Isaiah had not drawn a concept. He had drawn a building with a person already in it, a specific person. A man with a name and a location and a carpenter's pencil behind his ear and 2 initials he carved into the bottom of everything he made. Jamal looked at the notebook. He looked at the name, Booker Tate, written in the same neat handwriting that had tracked every dollar and every lesson for 7 days. He looked at his youngest son. He said, You did not just survive the week. You saw someone. Isaiah said, He saw me first. The sentence was 5 words. It contained the entire week. It contained a church basement and a plastic knife and fork handled with dignity, and a denim jacket bought in 1997, and a carpenter's pencil worn down to 3 inches, and a box made from $9 worth of wood. That was the first piece a man had built in 2 years. It contained the moment when Isaiah had sat down across from a stranger and asked about a jacket, and a stranger had become a person, and a person had become a name, and a name had become a plan. Jamal closed the notebook. He held it for a moment. Then he handed it back. He said, This is yours. He did not mean the notebook. 6 months later, the building on the lot in Vine City was not finished, But the ground floor was. The workshop opened on a Tuesday in September. No ceremony, no ribbon cutting. Mr. Booker Tate arrived at 6 in the morning before anyone else, because that was what he did. He unlocked the door with a key that had his name on the ring, the first key he had carried in over 2 years. He turned on the lights. He put on his safety glasses. He tucked the carpenter's pencil behind his ear. Not the old one, a new one, though he kept the old one in the box on his nightstand. 4 other men worked in the shop now, all formerly homeless. One had been a mechanic. One had never held a tool in his life. Mr. Booker taught them the way he did everything, slowly, carefully, with the precision of a man who believed that how you measure is who you are. He was teaching a 19-year-old named Devin how to read a tape measure when Isaiah walked in that morning. Devin was holding the tape wrong. Mr. Booker did not correct him with words. He put his hands over Devin's hands and moved them to the right position, and said, "Now read it." Devin read it. Every piece of furniture that left the workshop had 2 letters carved into the bottom, B.T. Mr. Booker's mark, the mark he left. Elliot did not run the project. He went back to Drummond Capital Partners. But he went back differently. He volunteered to launch a pro bono consulting program for small businesses in Vine City and the surrounding neighborhoods. He took a pay cut to do it. He still wore his Oxford shoes. But he walked to meetings now, sometimes 10 or 12 blocks. His feet had learned. He did not complain about them anymore. Darnell split his time. 3 days a week at Opal's Clean and Press, where he now opened the shop at 6 a.m. Because Mrs. Opal's knees had started bothering her, and she did not say so, but he noticed. 2 days a week, at the workshop handling operations, ordering materials, managing the budget. He did not talk about disruption anymore. When someone asked him what he did, he said, "I help people get what they need." It was a small sentence. It fit. Isaiah lived in a 1-bedroom apartment 4 blocks from the building. The rent was low. The salary was lower. The notebook was full. He had started a second one. It sat in the top drawer of a small desk in the apartment next to the pocket watch. Gold-plated. Scratched. The glass face clouded. It had not worked in 15 years. It sat in the drawer beside the notebook the way it had once sat in a drawer beside another notebook, in another desk, in another room, in a house in Buckhead that belonged to a man who had built $1.2 billion and had decided that the thing he valued most was a lot in Vine City with weeds pushing through the concrete. Mr. Booker had a room on the 3rd floor, his own room, a bed, a window. On the wall beside the window, a photograph of Lorraine taken before she was sick, smiling in the kitchen of the house in Decatur that he had lost. Beside the photograph on a small shelf, the pencil box. The first piece, poplar wood, sanded, smooth, the lid sliding into grooves carved with the edge of a key. Inside the box, the old carpenter's pencil, 3 inches, flat, worn almost to the graphite. He kept it the way you keep things that remind you of the moment you came back to yourself. Jamal sat in the study in the house in Buckhead on an evening in late September. The light was doing what Atlanta light does in September, going golden and slow, taking its time, leaving the way light does when it has nowhere urgent to be. He opened the top drawer of the desk, the drawer where the pocket watch had lived for years beside the notebook with the cracked spine. The watch was gone. He knew where it was. It was in a drawer, in a small apartment, 4 blocks from a workshop in Vine City, next to a notebook full of numbers and sentences written in neat handwriting by a 22-year-old who had spent $50 in 7 days, and come home with something that could not be deposited or measured or lost. Jamal looked at the empty space in the drawer. He did not feel loss. He felt the specific lightness of a man who has spent 40 years carrying something and has finally set it down in the right place. He had built a company worth $1.2 billion. He had built it from nothing the way his grandfather had built, from nothing the way people build when they know what nothing feels like and are determined never to feel it again. He would spend whatever time he had left building something else, something that could not be measured in quarterly reports or shareholder meetings or the brushed metal letters on the side of a building. Something that would outlast all of it because it was built not from capital, but from the specific, unrepeatable act of one person seeing another person and deciding that they mattered. He closed the drawer. He looked out the window. Atlanta stretched below him, wide and lit, and alive, the city, going about its evening, the way cities do, indifferent and permanent, and full of people carrying things inside them that no one else could see. For the first time in many years, Jamal Drummond looked at a city and did not count. In the workshop in Vine City early the next morning, before anyone else arrived, Mr. Booker Tate stood alone. The lights were off. The room smelled like sawdust and linseed oil, and the specific quiet of a space that is about to be filled with work. On the bench in front of him was a table, small, rectangular, oak. He had built it over the past week, the way he built everything, slowly and without shortcuts. He ran his hand across the surface, smooth, even, the grain visible under the finish, the wood showing what it was without pretending to be something else. He turned the table over. He reached behind his ear and pulled out the pencil. He carved 2 letters into the bottom, B, T. He set the table down. He stood back. He looked at it for a moment. Then he turned on the lights. He opened the door. The morning came in. Thank you for watching. Before you go, tell us in the comments. If you had $50 in 7 days, what is the first thing you would do? And who is the Mrs. Opal or Mr. Booker in your life? The person who gave you your first real lesson, the one you did not know you needed until you received it. See you in the next one. This story is a work of fiction. The characters, names, and events are entirely imagined. However, the themes it explores, generational wealth, homelessness, medical debt, the dignity of labor, are very real. According to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, over 650,000 Americans experienced homelessness on a single night in 2023. If this story moved you, consider looking into organizations in your community that support workforce development and housing for people experiencing homelessness. On a personal note, I think the hardest part about this story was not writing the struggle. It was writing the moment Darnell walked back into that laundromat, because most of us know what it feels like to resist asking for help. Not because we do not need it, but because we are afraid. It means admitting we are not who we thought we were. That walk back through the door, that is the real test, not the $50.